Competitive bids are much more involved, and generally they're reserved for much larger projects. Even though some clients, will insist on doing RFPs for even mid-sized projects, generally you're going to be the big ones. And they're typically going to involve 5 to 10 vendors, although again, there's no hard and fast rule for that. They could involve just 2 or 3, and sometimes more than 10. But they usually, try to keep it to 5 to 10 because that allows, that gives them enough variety, enough bids that they can compare and contrast. They want to have at least 3 bids that they can look at the end of the day, and some people are going to fall out of that process. The other thing is that, if they have too many, it really makes the process really burdensome. So you don't typically see more than 10, unless it's a really massive, multi-million-dollar type of deal, and even then, it's rare. So although with state and federal grant types of projects, that may be more common, I'm not sure. But in the corporate arena, 10 would be considered a lot, and probably the idea is that many of them will drop out, throughout the process. So where you may wind up, by the time you're done, you may wind up with 3 to 7 vendors involved. Now you can assume that at least one of those vendors is an incumbent vendor, meaning that they are there already, they have a master services agreement, they've already done work with the client, and possibly they maybe even have helped the client write the RFP. A lot of times clients don't write the RFPs themselves, or if they do, they get a lot of input from their vendors, their preferred vendors. And so these guys already have an inside track, right? Now maybe you're one of those incumbent vendors, and that's a great position to be. That's really where you want to be. But if you're not, just keep that in mind, that there are always going to be other folks bidding who probably have an inside track. If it's not you, it's them. And even if you have done work for that client, if you weren't involved in helping them create the RFP, there's a good chance that you're not on the inside track, right? So keep that in mind. There's typically some sort of a Q&A step that comes. So they're going to send out an RFP, and then they're going to usually give you like a couple days or a week to get back to them with questions. And the Q&A could be as simple as email in your questions, and then they'll email you back responses, and maybe they'll only send you back responses to your questions. Or if you're lucky, they'll send back responses to everybody's questions so everybody can see it. In some cases, you may have a Q&A conference call, where all the vendors have an opportunity to come in and pose their questions live and hear responses live. That's always nice, but those are less common. The most common way is to do things in writing. They generally don't like to, especially if procurement's involved, they generally don't like the client having a lot of interaction with the vendors. So, because they're trying to keep the process as objective as possible. So anyway, there's going to be some Q&A call, and that between the document that you get and the Q&A call, that's all the information that you're typically going to have to go on in order to do your scoping, and in order to be able to do your costing and pricing work. So it's not a lot to go on, which it makes it a very difficult process for people, and there's a lot of guesswork that's involved in RFP responses. But at some point, you're going to generate some sort of a proposal, and you're going to submit that proposal, and it's going to take the form of, if it's an RFI, there might be some information pack that has a whole bunch of information and sales collateral talking about your capabilities. It could be a quote sheet that just talks about the numbers, the quote. It could be a proposal where you're actually laying out a solution that you're proposing. Or it could be a combination of all three. Right? A lot of times you are submitting multiple documents in response to an RFP because they do want capabilities information, quotes information, and solution information. So be prepared for that. It can be a very long and difficult process. Just this process alone, this part of it, from the time that you get your RFI or RFP to the time that you submit it, it could be a week, maybe 2 weeks. It's a relatively short period of time. Sometimes, if you're lucky, they'll give you 3 or 4 weeks. If they've called you and asked you to participate in this and have only given you a few days to do it, it's probably because they didn't get enough responses from vendors. And so now they're reaching out to others that they know that are in their network. That's usually not a good sign. So if you're not getting at least a week's notice, personally, I would stay away from it. About a week should be enough time for you to put together a proposal, assuming that you've got your pricing system in place and you've done a lot of the homework in advance. A lot of the legwork that we've talked about and that we'll continue talking about in terms of building out your pricing system. If you've done that, a week turnaround is reasonable. 2 weeks is more than reasonable. So you're gonna submit a proposal, and then what's going to happen is that they're going to select from those proposals typically a few vendors that they're going to bring back in for presentations. It doesn't always happen. Sometimes they go right to a decision, but more often than not, they're going to have a presentation phase. So that from that list of 3 to 7 vendors that actually submit a proposal, they're going to whittle that down to maybe 3 or 2 vendors. They probably don't want to go more than 3 because, again, it just gets cumbersome. It's a lot of scheduling headaches that are involved in trying to get presentations lined up. Sometimes they're face-to-face, sometimes they're virtual. In either case, you have to line up all the different committee people who are going to be involved in the decision. All those decision makers got to get scheduled and to attend the meeting. There's the logistics of getting you and all of your presentation materials and stuff in front of them and coordinating all that. It can be challenging, but for the larger RFPs, you'll typically see a presentation done by the shortlisted vendors, 2 to 3 vendors, and then from there a decision is made. So that process from you submitted your proposal might have taken a couple of weeks from the time that the RFP arrived, say 2 weeks there, and then it may take them anywhere from a week to 4 weeks before they get back to you on shortlist selection. And then you may have a week or 2 weeks to get ready for your presentation and then deliver it. And then it might be another 1 to 4 weeks before they actually make a final decision. And part of the problem, or the reason why it takes so long, is that they usually have multiple decision makers who have to get brought together and have a discussion and weigh, which ones, what they liked and didn't like and so forth. Have conversations about it, probably multiple conversations until they finally make a decision. And some organizations just take longer than others to make those kinds of decisions, which is always a good indicator too, by the way. If they do take an unusually long amount of time, it's indicative of what life is going to be like when you do get the project and you are working with them and you need them to make decisions about things and get approvals on different deliverables. You can expect that a lot of those same decision makers are going to be involved in that approval process and that it could take just as long to get any sort of decision made. So again, I say 1 to 4 weeks, but it could be longer. So once the bid is awarded, that doesn't mean that they send you a check right away. So, it means you've won the bid. Now it's time to actually sit down and nail down the details of what's going to be contracted. So a lot of times, even after the bid is awarded, there's a step there where you create a statement of work based on what was discussed and what was awarded. And then you negotiate around the contracts and so forth and go through that contracting process. So you're still looking at another at least week or 2 weeks there of negotiating and contracting before that bid awarding turns into a signed deal. And even once you have a signed deal, it could take another week or 2 for that PO to be generated, a purchase order, right? So it's really a lengthy process that can take several months to work through. And I've seen it take as long as a year with some very large multi-million-dollar projects where they just every step just took many weeks and sometimes a couple of months in between steps. So don't be surprised if it takes 3 to 6 months to really work through this process, and you have to decide whether or not that's really worthwhile for you. And I always, advise folks I'm working with is not to think of RFPs and RFIs and RFQs as a short-term way of generating business. It's a long-term process. You have to decide how many of these every year you're going to bid on, what you're going to turn away, what you're actually going to bid on, what's your criteria for selecting them, and then think of it as a long-term process, right? And if you get it, at the end of the day, you get it, that's great. But you're probably going to lose some of these, so you're going to put all that time and effort into it, and then at the end, you may not have the deal awarded to you, or you get the deal awarded to you, and negotiations break down, and you wind up walking away. So anything can happen. So the odds are generally not very high with these types of RFP processes, but the payoff can be very big, because at the end of it, you could win a very large project that can make all of this worthwhile, and then you've gained a new client, which also could then lead to additional projects, additional work, and a long-term relationship. So there's no right or wrong answer here. Some people say no to all RFPs, and others say yes to every RFP. It's probably somewhere in between, and we'll talk later about in the master class. We're going to spend some time talking about what RFPs make sense for you to take on, and which ones that you should walk away from. Right? So anyway, but this gives you an overview of the sales cycle for both a non-competitive scenario and a competitive scenario. The non-competitive scenario for a new client can take 3-4 weeks to get in place before you have a PO. If it's an existing client, you already have a master services agreement, MSA, then you could be up and running in a week or two from the time that the client comes to you and asks for help. With the RFPs and so forth, that you're looking at a 3 to 6 month long process. So this graphic hopefully captures all of that, and we're going to be referencing this again and again as we go through the rest of the Pricing Your Services course.